Welcome to my workshop. Today I'm going to show you how to turn some of these and one of these into this. Stay tuned and I'll show you how. Welcome to Frank's little workshop. Shall we make something? Welcome back to Frank's little workshop. This week I'm going to be making a present for my sister because it's her birthday. She wanted a cookbook stand which she saw on the internet and she thought she'd like one. So I've decided I'm going to make one. I'm going to make it out of bamboo, which I've never worked in before, and this is basically how I made it. Let's have a look. So firstly, I took my raw materials, which was some bamboo cutting boards, which I bought from the factory shop, about £1 each, so they give me enough material. Checking them first, it seemed like they weren't as square as I thought. So my first step was to cut them all square, to make sure that when I stick them all together there's no big gaps or anything. Using my table saw sled here, which I made very quickly, it works really well, but this will make sure that I get square boards when I stick it all back together. So putting away my table saw there, having a quick sweep up. Okay, now to figure out how big I want the board, and I want to have it in two layers, the back layer and the front layer. So I've got to make sure that all of the boards that I cut, when I stick them together, none of the joins overlap. So as you can see here, I was basically chopping up the boards so I could have two layers and I could laminate them together. Now this part here is now where I started to stick them together. There was no biscuit joints or anything, it was all purely glue, which I used the Gorilla Wood glue, which I found is quite good. These parts here are the back panel, so I've basically had to make those out of 3 sections of 2 boards. Now these have all been stuck together now, and I'm clearing off the paper. The reason I put the paper on is because it's easier to sand the paper off rather than actually sticking the boards to my clamps, because that leaves residue of glue and which causes problems next time you glue anything up. So again, you can see I'm using the paper here and some weight just to hold them so they don't bow when they're drying. So that's them all dry. I'd left them for a couple of hours. Now I've taken the front and the back boards. I'm clearing off the treatment that's on the boards, so when I do glue the front and back together, it's just purely glue. There's no varnish or oil or anything. So checking them for size here, nice even coating of wood glue, press them 2 together and then clamp them. As you can see here, you can never have enough clamps. Ask anyone who's ever done anything with wood. Clamps are, there's not enough in the world. Okay, this section here, this is going to be the stand at the back, the bit that folds out to actually hold it vertical. Okay, that's my front board now is dry and my back board is dry, so now it's trying to trim those up, again using my table saw sled to trim them so they're all square, which is much better if you can get it perfectly square, otherwise it may not sit properly. Okay, moving on now to the actual part that holds the book, that the book rests on. Now this is going to be a little hinged piece. I actually use a little piece of oak for this, and that bit is the actual, this is now the design for the actual stand at the back. This is probably the most complicated thing about the whole design. I wanted it so there was no hinges, no visible hinges, so I decided to go for a rod. Initially I was going to use a little rod I had, about a 4mm rod, but I ended up using some standard nails, cut their heads and trimmed them up so they could basically be used as pivots, which you'll see in a little while. Now these are the screws for mounting the back to the board, countersunk, so obviously there's no protruding screws, and trimming it off here, that's sanding it so there's no sharp edges. This is where the bucket comes in. I needed a piece of metal rod, and the best place to find a bit of metal rod is on the bucket, obviously. So I took the handle off and flattened it out so I could actually use that as the actual mechanical stand. You can see here, as the intention is to use it just so it looks like a bit like a mousetrap. So make sure that that's all the right size. Again, trimming it, easiest way to trim it and bend it was obviously using an angle grinder to trim it. You can do it with a hacksaw, but it's a bit more fiddly. You can see the basic principle there of how it's going to work. But it does look like a little mousetrap. Okay, now these are the grooves. Quickly making some grooves for the wire to sit in to get it at the right height. Okay, back to the front book stand. Now this part is where I'm making the recesses for the two hinges. This part obviously I needed to have hinges, which you can see. And the easiest way to do the recesses was using my table saw sled and the table saw blade set to a certain depth, so when you put the hinges on it's flush. This part here, just finishing it off by hand with a chisel, so everything's recessed, and no sharp sticking out edges of the hinges. Had some trouble with this part. I was using tiny little brass screws. One of the brass screws actually snapped because it was going into hardwood. So that had to be repaired, and the secret was to basically put a tiny little bit of wax on each screw when you was screwing it in. This is the rear stand. I was just centralising the position, marking it out, and then obviously doing some pilot holes and putting the screws in. So that's the basic principle of how that works. Now over to my CNC machine, which I made. Basic design, I just wanted a simple design in the middle to personalise it. This was me setting up my CNC machine. So the actual CNC design took an hour or so, and the actual cutting took about half an hour, which obviously I haven't showed you here. Now this is back to the book rest part, just rounding off the edges here, so there is no sharp edges for obviously when it's in the kitchen. You don't want to be catching yourself on it. And some manual sanding, which is always good fun, just making sure there's no bits of paper left. And now I've used my trim router with a guide trim bit in it, just to square off the edges and make it, look a little bit more usable. This was a trial fit onto a piece of ply, just to check to make sure it was all working okay. Final trim routing on the actual book rest section, then a final fit. Put the hinges on. Does it work? Yes, it does. Now I used some mineral oil, so there's no, didn't want to use beeswax or anything, but this is a food safe mineral oil. Basically I did 2 applications of this. You apply it, allow it to soak in a little bit, and then buff it off. and then basically this is the final product. Well, thank you very much for staying till the end. I hope you enjoyed that project. It's been a nice project, nice bit of bamboo, which is good for the environment. Yes, I've enjoyed this project. I hope you've learned something. If you've got any questions, put them in the comments below and I'll try and answer if I can. Next time we'll make something else out of wood, and join me then. Thank you very much. Bye. Welcome to Frank's Little Workshop. Shall we make something? Welcome to my second workshop. This time I'm going to show you how to turn nothing into